In the media, in the news, we are reminded of people that want to harm us, especially recently. But there are people who want to help us, and I have a story about that. This weekend, we were at the beach visiting Nana and Papa in St. Augustine, and Noah didn't go. He stayed here for a birthday party, and we brought Mary Reed with us. And Mary Reed's 14. She's a teenager, so she doesn't go anywhere without a friend, right? You can't get her by herself. So we brought a friend with her, and yesterday afternoon, Murray and I are sitting on the beach. We had unusually nice weather for the last couple weeks. We're in our happy place, and the girls go for a walk, and so they're teenagers and they want to go, push the boundaries a little bit and take a walk, and that's fine, and go take your walk. Well, we were relaxing and figured they probably were taking a good long walk. And then I look and I see that they are walking back with a police officer or some kind of beach patrol person. And so I walk up to them, and they were visibly upset, and I gave Mary Reed a hug, and he explained to me that they had just been rescued in the ocean and were taken out by a rip current. Now, Mary Reed knows, and she doesn't need any more lectures, she told me, that she is not allowed to swim when I can't see her. And being a person of the ocean that has gotten my tail kicked many, many, many times, and even that morning by the ocean, you have to respect the ocean. And I wouldn't have let her swim without what I say is you have a floating device attached to yourself, like a boogie board or surfboard. You really shouldn't swim in the ocean above your waist without a floating device attached to yourself. You shouldn't. She knows this. I've saved her before when she was floating off. So here's the story. So we have this discovery, and then the girls settle down, and thank God they were okay. And then we pieced together what happened, and then went to go find people to thank them. And so here's what I pieced together. Mary Reed and her friend were hot from their long walk, and they just wanted to dip in the water. Mary Reed, that was an unwise thing, because Dad can't see you. Dad has his surfboard. Dad's watching. Dad knows, but they were down the beach. And that was unwise, but wisely, as soon as Mary Reed felt herself being pulled beyond where she could touch, she screamed out for help. And her friends, she said, we need help. We need to scream out for help. Well, a man then on the beach had taken out his earplugs, and this isn't a beach where there's a lot of people. There isn't any public parking. It's just houses on the beach. And so there wasn't a whole lot of people there. So a man takes out his earplugs and thinks he hears help, looks out and sees the two girls in this rip current going farther. He himself, he admitted, is unable to go jump in and swim and get there. But then he starts alerting people. And he alerted some people in a house right there. Unfortunately, they're water people and they're surfers. And so they ran down. They ran up to get their surfboards and ran down. Meanwhile, a man swam out to try to help them. So it was the three of them. The man, within 30 seconds of getting to the girls, the man realized, I'm in just as much trouble as them. So there's three of them out there. The couple, go out on their surfboards. They have to give the man, who's a very large man, a surfboard. So now the four of them have a different surfboard. So we've got a flotilla going on. And then they as people realize they're not coming back, they start calling 911. And so they're going back out further and further. 911's called. They send a boat from the inlet to come out around to help, to see if they can get to them. Two surfers then see what's going on and paddle out and get to them, get to the flotilla, and then are able to, as all Floridians should know, you do what when you're stuck in the rip current? You relax and you move parallel, as basically it's a rip current's formed because the water's getting pushed up, and then the water's going to make its way back out, and so it basically creates these rivers, these channels. There's channels in the sand because it gets deep. That's why you're like, hey, I'm right here about this deep, and all of a sudden, because you fall into one of those channels and the river just takes you out. So you relax and you go sideways to the beach, wait till you're out of that channel and come back. But this, because of the storms, and we could see at low tide, there was really bad rips. It was very windy. There was waves. And so they were able then, the surfers, to move the group out of the rip, and so they were able to come in. But this whole thing took about 30 minutes. And the boat was already, had arrived, and the ambulance had arrived. Two of the guys were unable to swim out there, but one of them was, and so he had his lifeguard floaty, and he swam out there, and the flotilla was then able to come in. And so we have had this experience of God's grace and the fact that people, you feel so, I felt, first mad that she would make that decision because I can help and I'm aware of what's going on, but just overwhelmed with how kind people are. And in a world where there seems to be a lot of harm, there is help. There are people who are willing to help. And so we met the couple, the couple that the guy had heard. We thanked them. We dropped a bottle of wine off at the house where the surfers live, and I know who they are. I've met them and talked to them before. And then we were able to thank the EMT gentleman, and then we met the two surfers. And those guys said that they live in that neighborhood. They each had two daughters themselves. And then one said, "Oh, you live in Orlando? What part?" "College Park." "I used to live in College Park." I've never seen these two guys again before. I don't think we're ever going to see them again. I told the girls, I said, those two gentlemen right there are angels that we just met. We'll never see them again. Two guys who have daughters themselves, and they acted like it was. They said, "Well, if we didn't get there, the boat would have been." They acted like it was no big deal. These guys, but there is help. There is God's grace working through people, and so we're overwhelmed, still processing this whole thing. But there are people who help in this world, and it's wonderful to know that. I like this healing because Jesus can always just say the word and someone can be healed, correct? I fail to see how this is a more difficult blindness than the other blindnesses that he healed. In fact, in a couple of chapters, he heals a blind man with a word. But in this case, there's a process to this healing. And so in one point, the man says, after the first try, if you will, the man says, Jesus says, "Well, can you see?" And he says, "Well, I can see people, but they look like trees walking around." And I just find that to be a really interesting idea, because I think most of the time we are walking around and people are trees to us. Do you see what I'm saying? We're kind of just buzzing by, And people are like trees. They're kind of blurry. They're beautiful if you take time to look at them. They're necessary for life. They're wonderful. If we would slow down and admire the tree, it's there. I mean, there's a tree across the street that we buzz right by that's just amazing. It's older than the light bulb. You can go look. It's older than the United States. And so it was before the Constitution, is what I mean. It's here on the land, but yeah, across the street, right here. Yeah, there's a tree. So I think what Jesus is, and here in this healing, that while they were taken away from the village, there's no doubt that the disciples came with and were observing, and there was obviously people walking around, because the man said, I see people walking around. Those are the disciples, walking around, and they look like trees. And I think the challenge to us is, that Mark's bringing to us, is, do we look at people like trees? They're just kind of these blurry things that we're, in our self-concern, we're just rolling right by. And that is what we see here from. And here we get into this Old Testament passage that's difficult. That's what we see in Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. Part of walking through a whole book is that you have these places where you think, this stuff don't preach, as they would say in seminary. This don't preach. Well, these guys were a perfect example of looking at people like trees. And these are adult stories here. Reuben is the oldest. And what's happening right now in the big picture is Jacob is at the end of his life, as Morgan explained so beautifully about her grandmother blessing. And so it's a wonderful tradition. We should all do this. Bless the next generation. And so that's what's happening. Jacob has 12 sons, and he's blessing them. And that's what we're reading through. And he's starting with the sons from Leah. He had 4 different wives. It was, as I tell the kids in chapel, it was a long time ago, guys. It was a little bit different, okay? And Leah was the one that initially had the first kids. But the way he lines it up is Leah's kids first, and then Rachel's at the end, and then the 2 handmaidens in the middle. And we know the story of Rachel was unable to have children, but they were both competing to have the most kids, to get the attention, to get the glory. They were sisters and rival wives, and so they were allowing him to have children with their handmaidens as well, so that they can win this competition. Part of the story. Okay, so Reuben was Leah's oldest. Reuben, the story goes, this is in the Bible, you could read it yourself in Genesis. Jacob was now in the promised land with his big family. And Rachel was finally having children, and so she had Joseph. And then she had Benjamin. They were in Bethlehem at this point. Remember, they were in the promised land, but it wasn't theirs. It was the Canaanites. And so they were just traveling around. They were nomads in tents traveling around. They were foreigners in this land. And they went to the area of Bethlehem. And Rachel was pregnant and giving birth to Benjamin. And she died during that pregnancy. Now, if you remember, Jacob was in love with Rachel from the beginning. Rachel was his true love. His uncle Laban tricked him into marrying Leah first. Well, I can't give away the younger one till the older one's gone. You can marry her, and then you can have Rachel as well. But he was in love with Rachel, so he had just lost the love of his life. And then we read the very next thing that happens is Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, which was Rachel's handmaiden, who gave birth to Dan and Naphtali, Reuben's half-brothers. So what we see an example of is someone who is seeing other people as trees. In his lust and selfishness and self-concern, he sleeps with a woman who is connected to him. He violates everyone else, including her. Everyone else. He doesn't think about his father who's grieving Rachel, and now he sleeps with Rachel's handmaiden, Reuben does. He's not thinking about his brothers Dan and Naphtali. Hey, I just slept with your mom, bro. I mean, you see how disgusting it is when you see the sinfulness when we see people as trees. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to do my thing. I'm going to fulfill my sinfulness and my lust. And we don't see how how much harm it does. So that was Reuben. So Reuben, the oldest, is not going to get the blessing. The covenant's not going to go through him. And Jacob didn't forget this. Lived 137 years and did not forget this. Lived 17 years in Egypt. Didn't let it go. And so when it came to bless, this is what he said. So, and then we have Simeon and Levi. They are the next two in order. They're the second and third son of Leah, and they're in order there because Leah had the first four children first. So they're second and third oldest of the whole group. Simeon and Levi, again, very adult stories here. When this was earlier, before the Rachel thing and the Reuben's sinfulness, we had when Jacob took the whole clan and God said, I want you to go down to the promised land. You need to leave Laban and go down and go into the promised land and start living there. So they did. And the first place they settled was Shechem. Well, they did. Leah had a daughter. There's 12 sons and one daughter, Dinah. Dinah's in the kitchen, right? And so what happened in Shechem was a man, I don't know what that means either, Sylvia. People say it for some reason. It's a song. It's a song, and my dad used to say it in the walkthrough. I'm like, I don't know what song you're talking about. So, unless the Grateful Dead did it, I really don't know. I'm not aware. And they might cover. They maybe they'll do that. They do a lot of Bible stuff. Anyway, so where am I? Simeon and Levi. So they have their sister Dinah. So what happens is a man, a foreigner in Shechem. They're settled now in Shechem. It's the first place they settle coming into the promised land. And a man falls in love. A foreigner, a Hivite, falls in love with Dinah. And he forces himself upon her, okay? And then they find out. But then he comes to them, and his father comes to them, and he says, I'm going to do right by her. I love her, and I want to marry her. And, please, forgive me, make this right. Can we reconcile this situation? I do love her, and we could have peace between us, and, Simeon and Levi and say, all right, cool. The only thing is we're all circumcised, so you all need to be circumcised. Not only you, but your father and everyone in your village, every man in your village needs to be circumcised. And obviously he was very much in love with Dinah because he said, okay. And somehow he convinced the other guys, which probably cost him everything he had, that they would do it too. Simeon and Levi wait 3 days, so all the men are in pain, and they go into the village and kill every male in that village. They come home to Jacob thinking their father would be proud of them. And he said, do you realize what you have done? Do you realize the harm you have done? These are innocent people you have killed. Do you realize what's going to happen to us? A little nomad family. Don't you realize the stench of this is all the other villages around are going to smell the stench of this, how horrible it is. They're going to want justice. They're going to come together, and they're going to destroy us. We have to now move. We have to run for our lives. How could you have done this? And so it's another example of in their rage, as much as, and this is, a lot of people that do harm have their own internal reasons for their rage. But then they go and harm innocent people and take their punishment over the top. They try to take justice into their hands. And so essentially what they're doing is they're pretending they're blind. They're blind in their rage. They're blind in their lust, and they're treating people as if they were trees. In their self-concern, other people are just blurs as I'm cruising down the road going to what I need to do and I want to do and I've decided I'm going to do. So that's the connection there, is that they are the perfect example of the harm that's done. And we do it too. I mean, to lesser degrees, the story isn't as tough often for us. But when we, in our self-concern, we treat other people like trees and we do harm. Now, the good news, the gospel, is that intimacy with Jesus heals us of our blindness. Intimacy with Jesus heals us of our blindness. What is up with the spit in Mark? Jesus has Mark spitting on everybody. You don't see it in Luke. It's not in Matthew. In John, there's one little thing where Jesus spits into some mud and kind of puts together something, some paste. But in Mark, this is the second person Jesus has spit on. And, the first one I went with he's just like one of us guys. We know the value of spit, You spit on it, and then that sucker gets clean. The spit works. That's what I went with the first time. This time, I'm really trying to think, okay, what is up with the spit? So the only way to look is really to look in what context it's in. If we look in what context the spit comes, okay, here's a blind man that some folks who are caring, Jesus has come to town. Let's go get the blind man and lead him to Jesus. There's a healer in town, we've heard. Let's bring him in so that you see the kindness, the help in those people. And so they bring him to Jesus. What does Jesus do? He takes him by the hand, leads him outside the village, spits on him, touches him twice. So the spit is within this wonderful intimacy and caring. He holds his hand. I remember when I was in Guatemala with the youth group, and I tried to play soccer and with flip-flops on concrete, and I broke a bone in my foot. And then the missionaries are like, well, we're not going down the mountain for 3 days. And I was like, well, do you have any crutches here? No. So I hobbled around on a broken foot. And then the kids were giving me a hard time, saying I was just doing that to get out of the work, because we were up there and we were working hard. And so I really wasn't able to do much with one foot. And so anyway, finally we get down the mountain, and they take me to this clinic. And I'm limping in this wonderful, plump Latino mama comes to me, and the first thing she does, no insurance, blah, 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 who are you? She holds my hand. And then she just held my hand, and then she told them to bring me a wheelchair. And then she held my hand the whole time, going down the hall, bringing me to the x-ray room. She just kept holding it was so healing. She couldn't talk English. My Spanish is terrible. There's just something so healing about that. I was, right as I walk in, she was already in the healing mode. I don't understand the spit, but swapping spit is intimacy, correct? Can I get an amen on that? So what the point is of of this is that intimacy with Jesus is what heals us of our blindness. It's the intimacy with Jesus. For him to take our hand, lead us away from the village. And in the village is where we do treat people like trees, isn't it? It's where we get so busy, and we live in a busy, busy place. And we start looking at everyone like they're trees, and we get in our busyness. We need every day for Jesus to take us by the hand, take us away from that busyness, spit on us, and be intimate with us, and lay his hands on us. And we need his healing. Otherwise, we go along in life looking blind to everyone, seeing them only as trees, and we just do harm. We need Jesus. We need that intimate time with Jesus to heal us of our blindness, and it does. Are you spending time with Jesus every day? Are you leaving the village, the craziness, the busyness, letting him take you by the hand and letting him heal you in that intimate connection with him? In this section of Mark, what we have is, this is the beginning, this is the bridge into a new section. And the section is clear because you have a blind man healed and a blind man healed. And that's to bookend this section. And what happens is Jesus is taking the disciples and he's being intimate with them. Jesus is taking the disciples and he's teaching them. Jesus is taking the disciples and he's revealing who he is in this section to the disciples. And that's what's healing. In the earlier sections of Mark, Jesus has fed thousands of people. He's done these amazing miracles. He spoke to the crowd. This part of Mark is when Jesus leaves all of that, leaves the public, takes the disciples, and has intimate teaching time with them, in time where he reveals himself to them. And then is his final week. Mark is very compact. Jesus is in Galilee. Jesus heads to Judea. Jesus has his last week. And that's it. And so this little section that's bookended by healings of blind men, which is to say, disciples, I want to heal you of your blindness. I want you to see, is what he's teaching. And what he does then is he reveals to them. Jesus is revealing himself to the disciples. They're finally seeing that he is the Messiah. We get the transformation. We get this stuff coming up in this next section so that they can see. It is in that intimate space with Jesus, is in that quiet time, that he reveals himself to us and we can see who he is. And it is in that we are healed of our blindness and able to care for other people. See people through the hands of Jesus. It took 2 touches on this man's hand, on this man's eyes, by Jesus' hands. We are to be Jesus' hands and feet. Correct, church? We are called to be Jesus' hands and feet. So see through the hands of Jesus. Jesus touches us, and then we're not blind anymore. And if we see through the hands of Jesus, those hands that are always reaching out to help, not hurt, to be kind, to give, to stop what we're doing and go off. Look, somebody's in trouble, stop everything, pull out all resources, and go save somebody. Go help somebody. That's seeing through the hands of Jesus. And then we see restoration. And so I don't want to leave that Old Testament story, those blessings, without making this point. Reuben, Simeon, and Levi were each given their own territory. They each had thousands and thousands upon descendants that were part of Israel. They each had a territory within Israel. Jacob says to Levi, Simeon and Levi are connected here, and he says, you will be scattered throughout the land. That's what he says. You will be scattered throughout the land. Levi was not given his own space in the promised land. Why? Because he became a tribe of priests that were to be scattered throughout the land so that they could help, so that they can minister to all people, so that they can unify that nation, not just in Jerusalem, but to be in all areas, so that they can minister and help to people. That's what Levi became. Moses was a Levite. He was of the tribe of Levi, a descendant of Levi. And you see the change in him because you saw Moses initially. What's our first story with Moses? Well, once he was grown. He, in his anger, he killed an Egyptian man who was abusing a Hebrew slave. Okay, did he have a reason to be angry? Yes. But was he treating this man like a tree? Yes. And so we see that anger from Levi that was just part of part of what was passed down to him. But then we see a redemption and restoration in Moses because we see a change. And it was in a burning bush, a burning tree, if you will, that his blindness was taken away. Why? Because he had intimacy with God. Take off your sandals, Moses, because you're on holy ground. Why is it holy? Because God is here. So in that connection, his blindness, and then God reveals, well, who are you? What's your name? I am Yahweh. God reveals himself, and then Moses is changed. And he becomes, instead of being someone who hurts, he became someone who helps and someone who heals. There are people in this world here to help. I want to encourage you with that this morning. And we are called to be those people. We are all blind to other people. We see them and they look like trees to us in our selfishness. But Jesus can heal us of this. And may he heal us today. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. This is Mark 8:25. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored. And he saw everything clearly. Take a couple moments and allow Jesus to touch your eyes and heal you.